Okay, then we'll go ahead and get started. If other folks are joining, that's okay. The call is being recorded, so if anyone would ever like to watch back, that is also a possibility. We're here this morning to do our GL series workshop. My name is Michelle, and I'm going to be hosting the workshop. I'm a Mokdong teacher. I work at Mokdong branch, and I'm also one of the trainers for April and Cheongdam. Yeah, so this workshop is really just here for us to kind of, first of all, ask any questions that you have about GL as we go through the information, but also about the master's program in general too. I'd be open to taking your questions because I've been teaching masters for about 5 years now. So we're gonna kind of dive in, and if at any point you do have questions, you can just turn on your mic and ask that question or pop them in the chat. That's okay too, and hopefully I can get to everyone. So yeah, let's go ahead and I'll share my screen. Let's see, this is okay. Yes, so we're going to speak about the Global Literature Program for our summer semester. First of all, I just want to go over the objective of the track. It is geared towards reading global literature that is kind of well acclaimed, appears on many best-selling reading lists, and will help students essentially with global admissions. So if they are applying to an international school, if they're, looking to kind of do like Waegyo, like foreign high school, and get into that kind of thing, this is a class for students who have those objectives. And so as we're teaching them, we want them to be appreciating literature, looking at both classical and contemporary examples. As I mentioned, a lot of the books on the syllabi are critically acclaimed and appear on many best-selling lists. And then the projects that we'll do in class will be both analytical and creative-based. So just like if you've ever taken a literature class, we'll be asking students to do some critical output like discussions, critical essay analysis, close reading passages, things like that. But we also try to gear the class towards being creative, a lot of group collaboration, and leaning into projects that ask students to do things like poetry, different character studies, creative writing, but also to lean towards that analytical side, as I mentioned, and to do things like essays as well. So we'll have a balance of both in the track. This is just at a glance all of the different courses that are included in the GL series overall. We are going to go through all of them, but just here, this is kind of basically what we offer. We have 100 series classes. 100 is like a standard master and tend to be a bit more geared towards younger students and feature like YA type novels. Once we get to the 200 level courses, things get a bit more advanced. And we have, more in-depth theme analysis through dystopia or through kind of war literature. We also have a 300 level class that we'll speak about, which is essentially like an AP Lit class. This is like in the States or in Canada, if you're trying to get into college, usually in high school, they'll offer you AP classes that help you get, some university credits or admissions before you even enter. And then we also have 2 GT tracks that are included in GL, which are teaching TOEFL test taking skills at the master's level. Okay. And I'm just curious, just as we have everyone here in the chat, is there anyone who has taught like any of these GL classes before? Okay, not yet. So that's, I think, exciting. Has anyone taught any master's classes before? Are we all first-time master's teachers? Okay, cool. So given that it's also new to kind of program, new to masters overall, I'll also try to kind of, maybe gear some of this presentation towards what it's like prepping for masters and like being in the masters classes as opposed to like a C2 or A2 high kind of thing. Okay, so, all right. I'll first just speak about these GT classes, which are, Yeah, I'll speak about these first. And the way I want to do that is just to show y'all the actual textbooks. Let me see if this is sharing. Yeah. Okay. So the GT tracks, as I mentioned, there's two of them. They are for TOEFL test taking skills. Oh, I logged out. Sorry, let me log back in. Yeah, they are for TOEFL test taking skills. So even though students, once they level into masters, they're able to stop taking the level test. Typically, we still want to help them with their TOEFL skills because, again, if they are going to be doing global admissions and getting in to, say, an international school, a school abroad, they will need to take the actual TOEFL IBT test and score well on that. Yeah, so that's why we offer that track. And then what I want to do is just show this textbook. So let me just load this. Sorry, everyone. It seems like the call just lost for a second. Can you hear me now? Is I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. I feel like, yeah, I just lost y'all for a second. Okay. Well, let me just open up this PPT again then. I'll share this. Yeah, I wanted to show you all the GT stuff through the portal, but my portal's not loading. So in that case, I'll give it a moment and then we can revisit the TOEFL stuff. And instead, I think what we can do is just jump into like the literature stuff. We'll talk about that first. Okay, so these are all of the lit classes overall separated into their appropriate levels. So we have the 100 series, the 200 series, and then the 300 series overall. So with the 100 level classes, the goal here is really just to give students an introduction and kind of get them primed and prepped for what a lit class in masters looks like versus one of their V1 high classes. Okay, so we're trying to now get them to understand how pieces of literature can be thematically linked. We're expecting different kinds of writing output around the literature they read in class, and yeah, kind of pushing those critical analysis skills as well. But I also like to make modifications to ensure that there are opportunities for students to get creative. So for our 100 level classes, let's look at the books here. We have texts like The Giver, Lord of the Flies, and Ender's Game. So all of these texts feature young protagonists. They're all through the point of view of like a teenager. So this can be a great introduction for coming of age literature. For the social conflict literature, maybe some of y'all have read these books before. The Great Gatsby or The Book Thief are some of my favorites. And now no longer, I guess, feature like a young protagonist, but do still have themes that are relatable to the students. And as we move into the 200 levels, things start to advance because students have already taken these 100 track classes. That's one thing as a master's teacher that I think is important to kind of note and try to keep track of is asking your students what classes they've attended previously. Because the way the program is structured is that in order to get the most appreciation and be able to access the skills for these 200 level classes, the students should have already done both 100 level classes, which means like a full year at this 100 level. But if for whatever reason a student is, let's say, enrolling at the academy for the first time and gets placed into the 200 level, it's something that you'll want to keep in mind because they won't have had necessarily that year of exposure beforehand. Because the books are slightly more advanced, it means that students, again, expected to have some pre-existing knowledge on analyzing English literature. So the textbook design is less skill-based and more output-based from the 200 level. But some of these books I really like. Specifically, the dystopian track is really fun to teach if you're a fan of science fiction or if you like, kind of genre bending and world bending, things like Brave New World or 1984. This can be a lot of fun. Okay. And then finally, we have the 300 level, which is for, as I mentioned, AP Lit tests. So students who are going to be enrolling into like a foreign high school or international school would definitely take this track. It is highly advanced literature and has no prescribed books. So what that means is that the branch chooses which books they want to read for the term. And then based off of a list of recommended literature, the branch makes the decisions and it's up to their discretion about what they want to conduct. If GL 301 is going to be offered at y'all's branch, this is something you would work closely with your team manager or faculty manager on in order to run this class. And there are some good resources that I can show you that are available through the FTP. I'll start by showing you this one. So this is just called the Book Suggestion Database on the FTP and can be linked. Like in my branch, it's just on our drive now. But essentially what HQ has done is set up a bunch of links of like based off of different types of literature. So if you want to do pre-18th century, what are some examples in the literary canon of what we'd be reading? So Beowulf or Epic of Gilgamesh, Canterbury Tales, something along that line. And then they break down different, recommended novels, even some novellas through the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century. So if you're ever trying to decide what to teach for the 301 track, there is a database which is very helpful. And then, when it comes to teaching that track, you also get to decide if you want to do like one long book for the whole 13 weeks, maybe two mid-sized books or a bunch of short pieces of literature as well. So there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to this class. But since it is a 300 level, again, it's expected that the students would have done all of 100, all of 200, and now this is like a last class that they would be taking before they leave their time at Cheongdam. Okay, so that's just kind of an overview of all of these programs. And so to kind of get into them in a bit more detail, I think that ideally when you're doing a literature class, like I was a literature student during uni, I did French and English lit. And from the teacher's perspective, the best kind of programming is that you would go into the course already having read and understood what all of the books on the syllabus are about. But given our workplace, we tend to maybe prep 1 week at a time or a couple weeks at a time. And in this case, it would mean one book at a time. But I think one tip I can give to new master's teachers that really helped me over the years is even, in the first couple weeks, if you can't manage to read all the books at once, like I know at Mukdong, we usually only get our schedules sometime in week 13, right? Like right before the next semester. So it can be unrealistic to try to then read 3 books in 1 week. But what I do try and do is open up at least something like Spark Notes or like a YouTube summary if I've not already read the book on the syllabus. That way I can start picking out common themes, common plot points, different situations, motifs that appear in the literature and have a sense of what I'm going to teach overall through the term so that I can be well prepared. Because if you try to teach these classes the way you might do with like V1 PAR, where you just open, the section of the book week by week, With masters, this can be a lot more challenging because you're trying to get your students, to do things like identifying more symbolism, characterization. And with characterization, we want to understand it overall rather than just 1 week at a time. Okay, same thing with symbols. They tend to emerge as a symbol, of course, throughout the novel, but once we have a whole grasp on the entire book, then we can realize what the symbols are. So yeah, just as a prep note, I think trying to read ahead as much as you can or look at those summaries online as you prep. So for 102, the social conflict literature, these three books, they all, of course, feature some kind of conflict. In this case, it's people who exist in different social groups or are kind of different members of society. And here again, we want our students to have a framework that they can use in the upcoming master's classes, a strong emphasis again on themes, symbolism, characterization. Yes. One thing that can also be, I think, fun to do in the master's classes and can help to be like a motivating factor or to give more context to students is when these books have movies that are available. I like to show small clippets in class. Um, and just by showing those small sections to the students, it can help to provide, further visual understanding and contextualization. So for example, for The Book Thief and Great Gatsby, I know they both have films. So through like your Netflix account or whatever, you can always prep small clips to show the students too, which is a nice, added feature to teaching the class. Okay, then we have our 200 series, starting with the spiritual literature. So these books all focus on spirituality and the meaning of life. When I was in high school, I know we all read Life of Pi. That might be a text you're familiar with. But it's important to note that these books start to include more mature themes. In this case, specifically the Vonnegut novel, The Sirens of Titan. And so in this case, this track and all the 200 tracks really moving forward are only recommended for older students. If you have students who are in middle school, I'd say this would be most appropriate. For elementary school learners, not only maybe linguistically might they be challenged with the material, but also on a cognitive level, it can be harder for them to interpret some of the ideas. And some of the more mature themes then, of course, would be inappropriate to some degree for the younger learners. Okay, so as your branch is also scheduling these different programs, and when you see the course code appear on your schedule, that's another thing that I think is important to touch base with your managers or also with like the Korean, like 팀장님s. Speak with them about who's on your attendance and knowing like their grade average age before you get into the classroom can help you to prep and help you to know kind of what to modify and what will be most appropriate for your group of students, before you step into the classroom. The dystopian novels, of course, focus on societies that are kind of failing and act as some kind of social warning. That's something for us to reflect on in our own society, and to see how we can avoid a similar outcome. Again, there are mature themes in this case in all of these novels. So just keep that in mind. Something else, because I recently taught this track and I did have some elementary 6th grade students in the course. So something that I would do is just be really mindful as I was going through and prepping the passages that we were going to read together to make sure that I just kind of like skip over or avoid anything that I felt was too confronting for my younger learners. And when it came to teaching the textbook pages, I also did the same thing. If I felt like the prompts for the textbook were going to lead to a place where the discussion would get too mature, I would just try and avoid those pages. So you can always feel free to modify in that way too. Wartime literature, obviously these books focus on things like life, loss, war, global conflict, issues throughout history. There's a strong emphasis on the historical context. So I think something nice with this track is being able to provide historical background as you go through the novels. So for like a World War II novel, you can be playing different school of life clips or different interviews with veterans to kind of provide more real world context really to any of these books. Okay. again, dealing with significant themes as it is a 200 level class. And then GL 204, this is Gothic literature. So we're looking at quintessential sci-fi in a sense. All of these books explore kind of like the conflict of good and evil, pushing the boundaries of science and what the result can be, and then how to navigate those moral and ethical dilemmas. These, of course, are like part of the literary canon. If you ever do a literature degree, you'll end up reading all three of these because they are kind of like turn of the century pieces. Yes, but one thing also to note is because they are published quite some time ago, the style and like type of English in which they are written can be challenging for students. So I've also recommended at times that my students look at the abridged versions of the novels, specifically with Bram Stoker's Dracula. It isn't Middle English, but it veers towards that linguistic style. So when students were having a tougher time understanding, the abridged versions can at least offer them a more clear understanding of the plot if they read alongside with the abridged version. And for this 301 class, it is a modular program that's intended for very high level students who have, I guess, been in the program for really so much time at this point that they've done every single other master's class that has been offered. And so that's why the branch is going to make their own syllabus for these students. So the reading schedule gets determined by the branch and by the instructor. It's recommended by HQ that you select the books that are going to be read at least 3 weeks prior to the term so that staff can, get a hold of the copies of the books. Again, I showed you like that link for where you can find suggestions of what text to read. But you do have a lot of flexibility with this class, which is nice because as I mentioned, you can just say, I want to read one major text for the whole term, such as the Count of Monte Cristo, or you might decide that you want like a bunch of different varied short works that you just do for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. Okay. So that's just like a nice big overview. I want to get into some additional material and some of the challenges that you might face while teaching this class. Because, as I'm going through all of the books, obviously the big contingency here is that students ideally are going to be reading. They need to read the book before they come to the class. And maybe it would be nice to kind of hear y'all's experience. If you've taught like a upper level C2 class or V1 class, how do your students at your schools do with their reading homework? How's that been going for everyone so far?
They usually don't do it.
Okay, so for Catherine, it's usually they don't do it at all, or they do it a little bit. Like, what's the
They
vibe?
do it like they skim through it and then we have to go over it again in class.
Okay, good. Lee?
So I was lucky that my kids, most of them read it. But the content that I was given for the books was very difficult, just linguistically, because I had the Graveyard Book, which takes place in England, and we learn American English, so they had no idea what these people were saying, like the Cockney accents. And the other book was taking place in a fictional area that was between the United States and Mexico, so they used Spanglish a lot. So
Right.
they read it, but they were struggling a lot because it had different like dialects in it.
Sure. Okay, so I think both of y'all just raised two important issues there, which is first of all, just the task of reading itself can be a challenge. But then second of all, once they do get to reading, obviously there can be a linguistic challenge. That's particularly true in some of those books I just showed, such as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or Bram Stoker's Dracula. The type of English that is used is not American English. It's not what they're familiar with. And not only that, now obviously the themes, the content, the plot, and the level of English is all getting much more advanced, right? So in order to help kind of mitigate both of those issues, there are some resources at our disposal. The first is called, for 100 level programs, quote notes. Okay, so this is material prepared by HQ that is accessible through the FTP or that maybe y'all's managers would have already put onto your Google Drive or similar file sharing app that you use at your school. Quote notes are a handout that you'll give to students each week. So when they're reading the book, students will copy down quotes from the book, including the page numbers, and then write a brief summary of what happened in that quote. Why did they highlight that quote in the first place? What was interesting about it? What was confusing about it? What was surprising about it? In order to help contextualize their reading. And so that once you get to the class and you start, you can have them pull out their quote notes and start to find like similarities or gaps in their understanding of that week's reading. Once they get to the 200 level classes and 300 level, we just refer to them as annotations, right? Because that's effectively what they are. They're very similar to quote notes, but with more structure and with a greater level of analysis and what the students are outputting. It's kind of similar. You can think of it to like writing a little body paragraph in a literary essay. They're going to be doing so as they go along and do the reading homework. The number of quotes and how many annotations you want the students doing is up to your discretion. The FTP handouts have space for 10 quotes and 5 annotations, but you can always scale this for whatever is best for your students. And then, of course, once you assign it, make sure that you're checking the homework and beginning the class by going through a discussion of what they annotated, what was on their mind as they were reading. Yes, so this is what is provided by HQ, but I also want to show you something that at my branch we've prepared ourselves. So yes, the quote note handout looks like this, right? There's instructions at the top of what to annotate and then, fill in these quotes, and that's great. But I will say for students who already struggle with reading or motivation to read, once I gave them this, they also then just ended up sometimes just filling in random quotes or not completing this, right? So what we do at Mokdong branch to help the students is we actually make our own reading scaffolds. So this is an example. It's something we prep in teams at Mokdong, which is nice. So that's something I can recommend is at your school, if it's more than one teacher teaching the track. So in this case, like GL 101, it was myself and another instructor, Michaela. We were both teaching it. We share the prep in that case and kind of share the workload. And then that's really convenient for us as teachers, and it really benefits our students because what we do is instead of just handing them out those quote notes and saying like, fill in whatever quotes you want, we provide them with comprehension and discussion style questions a week in advance. So as they're reading along, they're able to answer these questions as they go. So as the moment between Jonas and Lily comes up in the book, they write the answer to it, right? Or how does the community and the giver view their own world? Are there any similarities to the way Korean community works, right? So now you're starting to have them make connections between the text and their real life for homework. Again, some of these are just comprehension, like there's only one right answer, but some of these are open answer. Has there ever been a time where you shared something with your parents? How did they react, right? And in this case, we gave them 6 questions to answer. And the really helpful thing I found with this, by prepping it this way, is that something you can do is actually in the teacher's portal. What you can do is actually go ahead and if we open GL 101, that textbook, let's say I'm prepping the homework for the week 3, right? What are they reading during week before they come in for week 3? I can actually just open up like the lesson 3 textbook and I can go through the dive pages. Dive pages are essentially in V1, like a content context page, like what we're actually discussing from the book. I can look at the sections and I can always go and have a look. What is the SMART textbook? Like what did the content developers for Cheongdam want to ask the students on these pages, right? And then I can kind of take these questions and modify them as I prepare the homework handout so that the work they're doing while they're reading at home is actually going to be really helpful and effective for once we start doing the SMART textbook and going through all this classroom work. Now they already have like a foundation so that when I ask them a question of like, why does the receiver of memories have so many books? I've already primed them while they were doing their homework to be able to answer that. So you can go ahead and use the STB to your benefit as well and use this SMART textbook to help you kind of pick out important moments, questions, or themes from the book. And then I like to rephrase them for homework. That way I'm not just like, copy pasting from the textbook. But I think it's a great use of resources. So yeah, both of those things are available to students, the quote notes or the annotations, as well as just going ahead and making your own comprehension homework pages. Now, one thing is here, obviously the page range, it's quite big. The students are reading from 25 to 81, which is a lot of things that they need to read in their second language. So something that I've done in the higher levels, like the last 200 level class that I just taught, what I actually went ahead and did is after the first few weeks, I noticed that not enough of my students were getting through the weekly readings or homework. So I went ahead and I would give them page ranges, and the range would be bigger than like where the question really was in order to kind of prompt them to read a bit more. But I explained to my students, listen, you at least have to go through and skim these specific page ranges and answer these 5 questions before you come to class, right? That's kind of like the basic, most basic approach, right? And once they were able to start completing this, I was then able to transition them over to something more freeform like this, right? Where now all the responsibility is on them for what they're picking, what quotes, what pages, why is it important? So that's just in terms of kind of remediating or extending the amount of guidance that you're going to give students. I really like the master's program to be student geared because effectively by the master's level, they're so fluent, they're fluent enough in English that they don't necessarily need to attend Hagwon anymore to be learning English in and of itself. But what they do need to be learning are other skills like how to be a critical reader, how to look for bias in literature, how to analyze themes. And so we want to support them through that. And of course, in order to do that, they need to read. So these are just some of the tips I've come up with over the years to help. Yes, these are the reading handouts. The other thing I wanted to show you, I should pop back to the presentation then, is in terms of their projects. So the final project for all of the GL classes comes in 2 parts, a term paper and a final presentation. So throughout the bulk of the term, students are going to be working week by week and scaffolding through a writing project, which is to compose a literary essay about one of the works, at least one of the books, if not more. Sometimes you can give them a comparative essay prompt. They should be following MLA format. So that's one of the things we teach in this class is how to do proper works cited and provide MLA referencing. And then depending on the level, the word counts vary. Okay, so this information can be found in any of the segment guides. I just wanted to bring it to y'all's attention now. The word counts vary based on their level. Okay, and also at your discretion, right? We don't want to swamp students with like a 2,000 word essay if they're so tired out by their schedule and overwhelmed by their other math and science academies that even writing 500 words is very overwhelming for them, right? So just always keep your students in mind as you're doing your programming. The essay is due in week 12, and the instructors in the final week's grade return those essays. Okay, so for our grading where we do weeks 9 to 12, we have to return the essays by week 12. So all of the guidelines, the handouts, all of the rubrics, everything is available on FTP. And then the final presentation, that's also worked into their final grading. The presentation is where they choose one literary device that they've learned in the term and then apply it to a creative work. Usually we try and prompt them to do that other than one of the books they've read. So another movie, TV show, video game, or some other book they've read that they liked. And students then present what they've learned about that device or element and how it's used in the creative works. Okay, and also in the books they've read that term. Now, these are the final project prompts that are provided again by HQ, but I just wanted to show y'all some examples of some other stuff I've kind of done through the years in masters. Yeah, so I also like to do other kind of creative writing projects. I recently had a class of students in the dystopian track that were just, it was only 4 of them, and they were obsessed with creative writing. They were so interested, so keen to do it. And every time I would try and get them to do essays, they were not as keen. So my branch was okay with me just doing like a 3-week essay project. So I did that in week 7, 8, 9. And that kind of sufficed for the term project. That's the modification we made, is just 1 3-week essay output. But the other projects and the final project, I made my own creative prompts for the students, right? So I would give them handouts that look something like this, where I go over the project steps, we discuss the dystopian elements, and then effectively what they had to do here is choose like a Korean fable or a fairy tale that they know, and then rewrite it to be like a dystopian, more dystopian than it already is, because a lot of those fairy tales already tend to kind of veer a bit dystopian. So they were doing like a short story rewrite. That's an example of a project I've done in the GL class, because the giver is based on like visions and your view on society. Michaela, another teacher at my branch, she just recently ended up doing like a vision board project with the students, where they had to kind of like view the different elements of their society, what's important in Korea, and then make a vision board on Canva of what they're going to accomplish, and then present their vision boards. Yeah, some other projects I've done is like book reviews. This was a helpful project to run before we did the essay, because it got students thinking about like how to criticize literature, what to look for as you review a book. And I provided them a lot of prompts here about, how to do this book review project, how to give the book a rating, everything like that. I also introduced literary devices and kind of started getting them prepped and primed for what was going to happen throughout the term project and the final project. Okay. Oh, and then, yeah, sorry, this is just an example of what a student ended up creating. I had that there. Oh, and one more thing is, I also, for one of the GL classes, what I ended up doing in the end is in the textbook, the actual prompts for the essay. Let me see, I think they're here. The prompts, when I showed them to the students, yeah, my students were like quite overwhelmed. Oh, it should be in week 9. They were quite overwhelmed. I'll just give y'all an example of what they looked like. And this was in a class, again, where I had a small group of students, only 3. But they ended up, feeling like none of these prompts were something that they really wanted to write about. That with Lord of the Flies, which example is written in that kind of, British slang, they were still having trouble discussing the major symbolism and understanding what those ideas represent for them as a reader, and what was the central message, what did it reveal. Yeah, they struggled with the themes that were just given in the textbook. So what I ended up doing was just choosing a prompt based off of the class discussions we had, and something they were able to, answer really well when we discussed it. I just turned that into an essay prompt for them. So discuss the ending of The Giver. Why did the author leave things so vague? Does that make the ending stronger or weaker in your opinion, right? And how does that idea of it being vague relate to the story overall? This was something they had an easier time with, so I just presented them with like my own kind of essay handout, where I had them, write their main idea, the evidence, the analysis, and then the link at the end. And I had them fill out the essay organizer first, and then I taught them the MLA formatting, and then they produced the essay. So I kind of, did things in steps. So y'all can always feel free to kind of break down what's given to you. Of course, it's excellent that at Cheongdam, all of this content is already pre-prepped and ready for us. And we have, an excellent R&D team who make all of this material. But I also think it's important to have our master's students stay interested, stay motivated, and feel confident in the program. We don't want, especially like the first one, GL 101, which is this track right here. We don't want them getting so overwhelmed in their very first master's class that then they don't want to continue through the rest of the program. So I think it's just keeping checks and balances on those kinds of things. The term paper material, again, that's available on the drive is excellent, or sorry, on the FTP is excellent because it goes through and breaks down, it already has things like essay outlines for you. It already shows like what is expected of the MLA formatting. I like to make things into PPTs, and I taught my own lesson on MLA formatting to the students, but all of the material you really need is already going to be prepped for you. It's just up to you as a master's instructor of what you want to kind of edit and modify to best suit the needs of your learners. And as I mentioned, if you do end up being scheduled with somebody else at your school who's also teaching the same class as you, I really want to encourage you to see it as an invitation to like get to know that teacher better. If y'all are already close, that's great too, to work together on the prep, and that will make the class even better. Okay, so a few more things just to keep in mind here are like approaches to how you prep. So something I like to do is theme-based prep. I find that best in like a literature class, but it does kind of require me to read ahead, to read the books as quickly as I can right in the beginning, and also to, consume other content like summaries or videos online about the books. But in this way, I can prep for the overarching themes that occur through my entire 13-week semester right off the bat. And that's going to make my discussions build on each other really, really well. And it also makes sure that I don't repeat too much stuff, that I have a nice like term view, right? You can also prep just based off of a unit. So you could view each book as its own unit. And then what you could do is as you prep, open up all of the weeks at once. So what you could do is open up from lesson 1 to lesson 4, right? You're doing that book for 4 weeks. Go through, like skim through all 4 of the STBs and figure out what you're trying to accomplish within those 4 lessons and make your prep notes that way. Then you have like an overall kind of approach to your prep rather than just going week by week. Again, these are just recommendations, but for me, in like the 5 years that I've been doing the master's program, I find that the week by week approach can end up being like pretty clunky. And it honestly ended up being more work for me, like more prep every single week rather than just trying to prep things, very prep heavy all at once. That first week 1 and 2, I'm doing a ton of prep, but then the rest of my term like flows really well. Okay. That's just a little bit of, my personal advice. As you're running your programs, some things to consider are creating a Google Drive for your classes. This is something we do at Mokdong branch is we require all the master students to create Gmails, and then they're able to join our Google Drive, and then all of the classroom materials are there. Okay, so just if I show you here for a second, what that looks like. It can be really convenient for things like homework submission as well. So yes, at our branch, we have like one folder with all of the classes we're offering right now in masters. So GL 101, for example, and then we just upload everything we need right here. This is Michaela teacher's folder, and then she has the students added to this Michaela teacher. And so her Monday, 7 p.m., they enter this program, and then they're able to submit their homework this way and also work on their projects this way outside of class. So everything they need is in here. She also provides book copies for the students in here so that if they ever forget their book somewhere, they can still do the reading. She puts all of the homework questions in here. So there's never an excuse, teacher, I lost my homework paper. Well, it was on the drive, right? All of the vocabulary gets uploaded here. So this is a really convenient way, especially at this high level, to just have all your students organized. And then what we do at the branch is this is accessible to every Mokdong teacher. So now if next semester or the semester after, let's say I get scheduled for WD 201, which is another master's class, I'm just able to open up these other teachers' folders or their prep notes, and I'm able to go through and use their prep. We share all of the prep at Mokdong. So I think that's something for y'all to consider at your own schools or branches if they don't already do that, especially for masters. We collaborate on all of the resources as a branch. Okay. And again, just speaking about resources, the last thing I'll bring to your attention, this is just like a little mood board, I guess, of different resources that are out there. For example, Crash Course or School of Life, the Khan Academy. These are really good, both websites and YouTube channels that offer a bunch of different themes that are brought up throughout these books that we're going to read in GL. They have really great YouTube videos and handouts that deal with a lot of the moral dilemmas, that deal with the thematic discussion, that even summarize the book. Like there's a really good Great Gatsby video that you can watch. Yeah, so just wanted to show some final resources here as we wrap up. And in this last few minutes that we have, I also wanted to know if you had any questions, any concerns, if they're GL specific or if they're about masters. We have a little bit of time here, so I'm open to answering any questions.
Do they have any vocab tests?
They have vocab tests, yeah, every week.
Okay. So how does that work in with the timing? Like, I'm guessing like somewhere on the drive it like breaks down all the timing for everything.
Yeah, so all of the segment guides, I believe they were already sent to you guys by FHR. I didn't walk through the segs just because I feel like I don't know, I didn't want to just read it out to everyone in the call. I wanted to talk about other things, but the timing is just like any of our classes. So you take attendance in the first 5 minutes and then you open the vocab test smart textbook and administer the test. And then the scores collect, they get uploaded to MERP, and then you just open the lesson textbook and start.
Cool. Thanks.
No problem. Yes, Lee?
Do you have any suggestions for if the students do ask about more difficult parts of the book, like just for like plain clarification, but you know that they won't comprehend if you do like explain it in a way? Do you have any
That's-
advice for that?
Yeah, that's a nice question. So when I recently did Lord of the Flies, they weren't really understanding like who's the beast? Like what's the beast? Who's the beast? They couldn't grasp that essentially the beast is like an analogy or it symbolizes like this force in society that's inside every one of us. That's why we can't see it. And rather than kind of like lecture and explain it to them, some simple tactics I try are just by saying, well, turning the question on them. Who do you think the beast is? Right? They don't know. Okay, well, let's open up this page. Page 69. Let's read out loud together the little section on the beast. Well, what clues do we have here? Does it seem like Pig Boy is talking to the beast? Is this a real character? And I try to start to just prompt them with more questions to kind of lead them towards the idea that in the end, the students were able to answer to me, oh, that means the beast is not real. It's not a monster. It's not an animal on the island. It's not really there. So then what else could it be? Right? And then I tried to kind of introduce to them things like foils, character foils. Obviously, they didn't know what that was starting off. But yeah, I try and prep, like if they ask me that question in week 2 or 3, I'll tell them like, okay, let's wait until the end of the book, put a pin in your question. And then when I go home and prep for the next week, I prep a whole section that will help answer that question without me having to lecture. But again, I think like again, those strategies require, more work, more input into the prep, more than just what's in the smart textbook. But for me, I really love teaching the master's tracks because I was a literature student. Yeah, and I just enjoy teaching in general. So I think those can be some good strategies that do require a lot of your time and effort, but might help your students get there in the end. Yeah. Alrighty, if there's no other questions, I'm just going to provide y'all with a link really quickly. This is just a survey about this workshop that I've conducted. If you have any questions while conducting the survey, do let me know. Okay, and then after you've conducted the workshop survey and submitted it, you are free to leave the call and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Goodbye.
no problem. Yeah. Oh, I'll also put my email here. I didn't put it in my slide, but just in case y'all had any questions moving forward, you can just have me as like a point of contact, and hopefully I'd be able to answer any questions, because sometimes that happens, like right now you don't have a question, but maybe later on you would. So. Thank you.